But Mark and his wife Kathy came to Decatur in 1969 for his first teaching job. After 13 years with Decatur Public Schools, DPS, Mark commuted to Springfield for 27 years to work at the Illinois State Archives. Mark has served on the boards of Macon County Historical Society, the Historic and Architectural Site Commission, the Governor Richard Oglesby Mansion, and the Decatur Public Library. He is past president of the Illinois State Historical Society, a recipient of Lifetime Achievement Award. 20 years ago, this May, Macon County Board named Mr. Sorensen the first official Macon County Historian. And that was done by the county board. So, welcome.
That's all true.
Yes. Yes.
So far. You'll sit near here so I can hand you things because
sure.
we decided to do. I've talked here before, and I quickly remember that it's not a good place for visual slideshows and things like that. So I'm going to skip the first part of my program since we're a little late. I want to thank Doug for inviting me, and Brigida also for helping me do what we do here. So I'm going to start with, how did I get here tonight? Not counting the Avalon and the parking lot hybrid. Which reminds me that Doug mentioned past president of the Illinois State Historical Society. So we put out this magazine, so everywhere I go, and they're behind you on that table. I brought 5 from an article I wrote last May about the definitive article about racial lynching in Illinois, unfortunately. But we'd love to have people join the State Historical Society. You can go online and look that up, and on the back of each of these magazines there's also a thing. So how did I get here tonight besides that is because I write for this magazine normally at least 3 or 4 times a year. And I've been working on a big article or a biography of Leonard Cornell. Leonard Cornell was in Decatur ended up being a coal miner as a kid here. And I won't tell you his whole biography, but it's working on the Cornell, who is this old man in this picture from the 1930s. When he was here in Decatur as a young boy, and the teachers saw he had some artistic ability, they got him hooked up with John's daughter, John's Hill daughter, who was an artist before she committed suicide. Took him to the Taft lecture at the library or the art center here in town in the 1890, and Taft was so impressed with the little work he did, he took him up to the Columbian Exposition. So Leonard Cornell of Decatur was the only man to work with the White Rabbits. All the women that Taft had only employed single ladies working on the fair because his wife had died. So here's a picture of Leonard Cornell with his son and some famous sculptures he's done all over the world. And I came here tonight because I was studying Cornell. I read someplace that he did a thing in French school for Marion Dills. So I went over to French school in 2002 and took this photograph of this beat up plastic relief sculpture in the basement of French school. You all know where French school is, right? Okay. And right after that, they condemned the building for a while. And apparently we'll find out next month how condemning they are. So that's how I got that. Well, when I was taking that picture and looking next to that, there was a picture of a lady with a bunch of geese, and it was labeled Goose Girl, and it had a little caption on it, and it had Ida Stout. By the way, that there is a placard next to that sculpture in French school with totally erroneous information, including the name of the artist. So this is one of my missions in life, is to try and fix everything, including the spelling of Sorensen the way I do. And so this Goose Girl was by a woman named Ida Stout. I didn't know Ida Stout. Believe it or not, yes, I have seen this sculpture on the mantle here, 30 years ago and didn't pay any attention. Who cares? It's a lady, She is naked, so that's nice. But, I never heard of this Ida Stout. So, I'm going to pass around then a photograph of Ida Stout from Decatur, what she looked like when she was around 30, 35 years old in her little smock. And there's a picture that I found on the Decatur Public Library website, where they have digitized things, of her house. So it says there on the online Decatur thing, it said, residence of J.L. Stout, 607 West Main Street. Okay. So I pass that around because what I had to do for this in this research is prove that Ida Stout is related to this Stout, and that this Stout is actually, the picture is actually true. So I had to go down to the county recorder's building and do that, research there to blah, 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 blah. And what I found out was all the city directories and the census all had no Ida Stout in it. All they had was Beulah Stout. So I started doing a search in the newspaper database for Beulah Stout, and sure enough, Beulah Stout is the daughter of this guy and the sister of Lillian, and they all fit together, but her name is Beulah. So I go to the county clerk and say, can you look up the birth record of this lady? She was born here in Decatur. And he looked it up, everything's filled out, mother, father, place, no name for the baby. So apparently, for the first 20-some years of her life, everybody called her Beulah. Okay? And now we call her Ida, and we have no idea how that happened. At any rate, those Stouts, what I did then was 40 years worth of newspaper searching for everything in the world about Ida Stout and her family. And what it says here in town is that growing up, they keep talking about her doing activities at the Methodist Episcopal Church in town. And then her mother plays the organ there, maybe. And the kids can sing, and this older sister is a great piano player, and all kinds of wonderful things. And they have huge parties at their house over here. And when they have pre-graduation party, all the 40 kids from the Stephen Decatur senior class come over here to party out down the street. And surely this girl is running around the lawn here, in the 1880s, because this house is built in 1876 starts, right? And so her older sister is Lillian Mary Stout. And so this Ida grows up here, and other than one tiny sentence that said she joined an art club at Decatur High School, because of course there are no yearbooks before 1914, so we can't use that as a reference at all. Ida is now called Ida in the 19-teens. In 1910, she probably moves up to Chicago with her big sister, who has gone to a special school. Might call it a kindergarten teacher's music training center type of thing. And it was only in Chicago. She wanted to teach young kids music. So she became a professional music teacher, and Ida goes up there and lives with her. At the age of 30, in 1911, both of these women, on their own, go to Europe for 2 years. So one of the things in my brain all the time is I've been to Europe before we had cell phones, and I can't figure out how I did that. So we did Europe for 45 days in 1972. How is that possible? Okay. How do these, can you picture two women with all these 1910 clothing apparatus on, taking off and spending 2 years on their own, and the amount of money that it would cost to do that. So they're in Europe, and the older daughter, Lillian, is studying the piano with specialists, and the younger daughter, Ida, is studying book binding. Okay? She thought she'd be a book binder, but she also did some works in modeling of textures. And she was encouraged to pursue her sculpting abilities. So when she came back to the United States, she started taking classes at the Art Institute in Chicago. Well, this is her first major piece. So she's not taking, she starts at the Art Institute in 1913. By 1915, a very famous art sculptor that's working with her said, "I like your little maquette of this goose girl thing. Why don't you enlarge that?" And so at the same time that he's telling her that, the people at French school want to honor one of the dead teachers. And so they say, "Oh, well, we know an artist in Chicago. Let's have her do something." And so they hire her to reproduce a full-size goose girl. Okay. And when it's unveiled, they had American flags all over the front of it, and then they tore the flags or pushed the flags apart to release that. So this is the photo that was in the Herald. Well, it's a photo that Herald Review did not use, but I got from the Herald Review. And then this is a photo of it in 2002 that I took. So it's a full-size fountain. It's embedded into the wall in the base, I call it the basement of French school. And it used to have water. And as you pass this around, you can see what we're talking about here as the goose girl. And when Ida has this unveiled, she says, "Well, when I spent the 2 years in Europe traveling around and gone to Switzerland and France and everything, I always admired these goose girls, the young maidens whose job was to tend the little flock of geese and take it around, and how lovingly they cared for these geese." Now that's her story. Is it a coincidence? Is it a coincidence that in 1915 the best-selling movie in the United States was called The Goose Girl? Based on a novel from a few years before that called The Goose Girl, based on the Grimm's fairy tales of The Goose Girl. So, I don't know. The only evidence we have is what she said to the newspaper reporter, or at least what the newspaper reporter wrote. So, that's a picture of what we did there, and my concern with the Leonard, starting out with Leonard Crenell, and right next to the Leonard Crenell, he's on one wall right here, beat up, and with a book cart shoved against his bottom, and right here is the Goose Girl fountain that used to be a fountain. Okay? And now I'm concerned that we have these two famous sculptors that have artwork right here in Decatur that nobody else in the world knows about, in a school that might be condemned next time. Okay? So, what are you going to do about it? At any rate, I started following Ida Stout, researching her. So during the next 10 years, after she did this in 1916, The Goose Girl, she won numerous awards for artistic works. In 1919 and 1920, she received the John Quincy Adams Scholarship Prize, which provided funding to study in Europe. And so she once again sailed to Europe in July of 1921 and used her scholarship to study for several months in England, France, Italy, and Switzerland again. When she came back in 1922, she entered this has a really long name, Okay, remember the Chicago Daily News, for all of us who grew up in Chicago, the Daily News was still functioning in the 1950s. The Daily News Fund Sanitarium for Sick Babies in Chicago. Okay, so we're talking 1922 here. And the Daily News, as part of their outreach, tried to help sick babies and babies with TB around the city of Chicago. Okay. So she enters this contest and she wins the $1,000 prize, beats all the men in this competition. The competition is only opened up to Art Institute students and Art Institute graduates. So she's now a graduate and she's doing some work on her own. So she enters the contest, and her maquette is one of the two finalists, and then she wins the contest. And now she's going to take her maquette, statue maybe that size, and turn it into an 8-foot statue. So, because we have all her passport applications, I can tell you that she's 5'3", or she was. She's smaller now. She was 5'3". She can tell you what hair color and eye color she had and all those businesses, and any tattoos. And look at this, and she's got my grandmother's shoes on, those grandmother high-heeled shoes that my grandmother wore when she was 65, and she's wearing them when she's 33, with those stockings and her knickers. But totally not being safe, standing on a 4-foot stool. So hopefully it was a photo op and not her actual work. So this is her studio, and she's like John McClary, makes these out of clay, and then you do the bronzing apparatus that some company will do for you, that you take that. Well, her statue was put up by the sanatorium in the northern end of Lincoln Park, so past the zoo. And on this backside photo are a staged photo by the Daily News, I'm sure, of wonderful little kids looking up admiring at this wonderful statue of this lady with her bazooms hanging out and thinking about that. So that statue, unfortunately, was constantly moved. Okay? I have heard life changes. Okay? Nothing stays the same. So the sanatorium, her statue's up there for, let's say, 1922 into the mid-1930s. About the mid-1930s, they decided to change Leif Erikson Drive and make Lakeshore Drive out of it, before they changed it last year to Dusabo Lakeshore Drive. And so now we have to cut part of the Park District property in order to get the Lakeshore Drive in there in the 1930s. And you've seen all of you, if you've driven on Lakeshore Drive, all those 1930 different decors, around that. So her statue is put away in a shed, and then eventually it's put into the Lincoln Park garden conservation area, and then it's moved from Lincoln Park to my old neighborhood by Garfield Park, along the Lake Street L tracks, and in the 1970s they paint it white so it'll match a Laredo Taft marble sculpture. And so nobody sees her statue or knows anything about it. So it was, big deal. So it wasn't until this last decade that it was taken out again, cleaned off, resurrected, and put back up. The sanitarium building was remodeled and made, it's called the Theater of the Lake, or I have it written down here. It's called the Theater of the Lake. And I map-quested that today, and I got to see the statue, so I've seen the pictures of the statue in its, what it looks like, right there. But I did a world view with trees and grass and things, and narrowed it down on the Theater of the Lake, and there it is. There's this statue standing right there looking at it. So it's in a prominent place for the last 5 years. It's, you know, an excellent piece of work. And now we're going to get to this young lady here. So she got $1,000 for that. In 1923, she won another $1,000 prize for this plaster cast of worship. So it's her only holy picture. Okay? Everything is naked ladies, okay, and other things. And now she has a holy, what we call it a holy picture. And so it's Madonna and Child in the visits. And so you can see that. So here's what appeared in the newspaper. Here's the newspaper clipping, if you take it out now. Here's the actual photograph from the Herald and Review with the markings on it. So they have taken this thing, which was taken in this house, and this might be the mantle. I don't know where they stuck this, or if it was on a table someplace. You might be able to figure it out. So when this was the Art Institute, they brought her sculpture down here and put it on display. And the Herald and Review took photographs and then marked it, saying, "Well, we're gonna highlight this one in a later edition. This sculpture is going to be highlighted," and so we marked it. So those are the two things there. So in 1926 now, she's received yet another scholarship from the Art Institute to study in Rome. Okay. So that's the good news. So she goes to Italy in January 1927. Her sister Lillian, who's still giving piano lessons in Chicago to famous people, joined her that summer and was present when Ida suddenly became ill and died quickly on September 2nd, 1927, at age 46 years of age, from a form of malaria known as Roman fever. Okay. Chicago Tribune art critic Eleanor Jewett wrote that Miss Stout was, quote, one of the most talented and promising graduates of the Art Institute and had just entered upon what would have been a most successful career. So I have in my notes, what if she had lived? Her first teacher, Millikin, is the one who put the relief panels on the current Supreme Court building in Springfield. Her second teacher for 2 months was Leonard Crennel at the Art Institute. And then they brought in another guy from New York City, and both that guy and Crennel have statues on the Capitol grounds in Springfield. So within 100 yards, 200 yards, you have 3 of her teachers all being paid to execute art on the state capitol. Okay. We didn't have we had up until 2000 or more, we had one piece of art by a woman in the entire Capitol complex. So it was hard for a woman back at that point in time. So how did Millikin Homestead get its first piece of art? She's dead, summer of 1927. In December of 1928, her sister Lillian gathered up all her pieces and brought 5 small brown figures and the plaster worship relief to Decatur and exhibited them in a place called the Decatur Art Institute, which today I think is the Millikin Homestead. Now, here, not only did I have to, when I read that, I asked Doug, "Where's the statue?" He said, "I don't know." I don't know. He said, "I don't know." So luckily he asked Brigida, who wrote me right away and said, "Well, it's in right here." I said, "Oh," because I had already written Millikin University, Mr. Walker, because it said, it belonged to Millikin, so they got it. Never heard of it, never saw it. I did a complete inventory of the homestead, and there's no statue there. Okay, so you have to keep asking those questions. So luckily, Brigida sent me the what we call a transfer sheet from Millikin back to the homestead. That you have the statue in 1974 or something like that. There she is, and here's how it works. I also kept calling the McDowell Institute or contacting them in New Hampshire because I never heard of them. But it said that she had a piece of art opened up there. They can't find it. They think it's bad reporting. But this Ida went to a place called the McDowell, and maybe you all know that because today it's called the McDowell, like I'm supposed to know that. It's the McDowell.
Well, of course.
And at the McDowell in Peterborough, that's where people go. And she went there in 1920 and 1925 to be with the art. Okay. So you lived in a cottage and you did stuff here and you took walks in the woods. So she walked in the woods, and so she wrote a poem called The Lady That Walks in the Woods. And then in her last gasping breath in Rome, she created that sculpture. So the poem came first. 2 years later came what you have on your mantle there. This is the, so here's a picture of a close-up of that statue by the Herald and Review. And here's the article on January 6th, which the newspaper mislabeled their banner with the wrong month. So, took me a while to figure that one out. But here's the article that says you have this piece, or that, it's coming here. It's the first piece of art that the Art Institute bought in their existence.
And this was 1930?
This is 1929. You purchased it in January 1929. That same article, by the way, says the Art Institute also bought a small plaque called, quote, Portrait of a Boy, 12 by 15 inches. Do you still have that? Don't ask Ed Walker.
Don't ask the accountant.
Jim will have to go.
I'm picking on Ed. He's a great guy. But so here's the poem she wrote before she made a dying piece of art. Here's the poem she wrote. He said, here's the poem. I have it. Well, I made a big version of it, but I'll read the tiny. Oh, there it is.
Jumped right out.
Yeah, okay. The Lady That Walks in the Woods. She walks in the woods. I see her softly glide from tree to tree, and silently she pauses, looks around intent to catch the faintest sound of aught unfriendly. Her long, silent drapery gleams as she passes through gloomy giant pines and silvery birches, while tender lacy ferns of palest green stretch forth their velvet fronds to touch the golden sheen. So I think you should be holding up this statue and reciting that poem every time you have your little poetry slams from now on. And a couple of things is I'm looking at that close up and that picture that the picture passing on. I'm trying to picture who she got to model for this, and I'm picturing this little tiny, 5'3", looks like the squarest woman in the world, most non-worldly person you've ever seen, and all she's doing is sculpting naked ladies around the around the world. And I'm thinking, well, I wonder who that Italian woman was that she had, that she made this, because it's beautiful, as is some of her other work, and the Goose Girl. So I'd be happy to answer questions. I have all kinds of trivia, but one thing for you is you're looking for a fundraiser, replicate the statue and sell it. And so, that's one asset you could do. You own that property. I have only been able to find 2 of her pieces auctioned that are in the pictures, and they never tell you, of course, who buys them and how much they paid. So I don't know how much you have, ask Ed. how much that's worth. She has a famous a sculpture in Chicago. Now, Julia Backrack, so I don't know if you sent out the article in the email that I sent to you from the Tribune. Not yet. Okay. I have an article from the Tribune that I can give you that has the website, but Julia Backrack, no relationship to the Backrack that used to live across the street in the 1940s, 50s, has a website, and she has done a complete history of the Caritas with all the places and all the things. So my plan is, right now, I decided because my granddaughter was in the Wizard of Oz, my next article is going to be about L. Frank Baum, in case you need to speak. And his Chicago years, because all of his money was made from the time he moved to Chicago until the time he left Chicago and declared bankruptcy in California. And so that's going to be my book for that. And then she's next, my rotation of things to do. And then KKK is the third. So, any questions?
I have a couple of questions. So, number one is, so this is her last piece then?
This is, as far as we could tell, she doesn't have this before she goes to Rome. According to the Herald Review, who of course put the wrong month on their newspaper date, it said, and I can send you the whole pages of the newspapers from December 28th, the sister brings the stuff down here and they say, the Art Institute is having these big galleries, and they're going to have 5 or 6 pieces from Stout. And they show you the pieces on that mantle that and that's obviously one of the pieces. Then, on January 6th, big headline, the Art Institute buys its first piece, The Lady That Walks in the Woods. So you have it here. Brigitte sent me, took a picture of the bottom base that has her name, stamped on it. Now, I'd have to assume she had the bronze made in Italy, and that the clay, the clay figure didn't come across the ocean and be safe, with her ashes or body, because I assume back then, I'm guessing we're bringing a whole body back here. Mm-hmm. Now, so a couple things I haven't done yet. Christian Science. Suddenly these Methodists, the mother is Christian Science, and the daughter is buried Christian Science. And so I haven't gone downtown to see, can you tell me anything else, from that angle, what's going on there? And there are a couple other little things like that. So
I assume the clay base was probably destroyed once the sculpture's made, I assume. If they want it to be one of a kind.
Yes, right, and it didn't appear, unlike Crunell, who has Gassman and Mueller busts in town here, and Ed Walker has one tiny baby head he made. He made 1 billion baby heads because he had all these kids. So he's perhaps reproducing some of them. It doesn't appear that all those things you saw on the mantle that they brought here, that she reproduced any of them. She made one. But it's the same thing with John McClary. I would be in his studio and he's molding in clay, and then he sends it off to the, and they make the molds, and it's basically cut up pieces of metal that you then glue back. You put back together, and
Yeah, I guess my point was, although it's circumstantial and it's more by just kind of induction, you have every reason to believe that this is a one-of-a-kind type of.
I do.
And the second thing is that I think you've demonstrated what I would consider pretty strong chain of custody.
Yes.
So you're reasonably assured this is a last work of a noted artist.
Correct.
It'd probably be worth having an appraisal done. I
That would
guess.
be my opinion. We inherited, we, the Illinois State Historical Society, inherited glass plate positives of a photograph taken of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 by a world famous photographer. And yes, we have the glass plates appraised, and they're insured, and we had it digitized. Same thing with Ed Walker digitized our library's picture of Abraham Lincoln that was taken downtown, Barn by Barnwell. So yeah, I mean,
And the more I think about it, it's all too easy to have somebody walking by and knock this off and the arm's bent, you know, I mean, it just sounds kind of funny, but
well,
maybe you're thinking.
that's what I know about it.
I have a safe place in my house.
In the article that I put in the Tribune and in my future paper, there is a website, because I contacted this woman I know, is Illinois Woman Artist, one word, IllinoisWomenArtist.org, and you could go there and look up this, and that lady has several errors in her website, which is not unusual. Not unusual at all. But she's excellent, and she runs the Women's Illinois Art out of Bradley University. And so she knew about, that these things existed, but no, where are they? Yeah.
I've been thinking about the piece that's in the French school.
Yes.
Is there any chance or talk of going in to rescue those pieces?
Well, what happened is, that's 22, and I get confused about COVID. COVID should have been over, right? So I went down there just before, the day before school started, took these pictures, talked to the librarian, got her name. I was going to get right back on it.
Right.
Yeah. Well, then shortly thereafter, they closed down the whole operation, and I'm thinking, oh, geez, okay, what are we going to do now? So as we got closer to this last 6 months, I wrote the school superintendent and Bill Clevenger, okay, both on the same email, saying, just letting you know, you have these two things in your basement of a school that may need to be torn down. Now, you tell me if they are going to if they have to tear down those schools, maybe if they don't, who should get those pieces of art and where should they be put in Decatur? I mean, Leonard Cornell is way more famous than Ida Stout. He's got lots of stuff all over. But they're, two interesting pieces. So what do we do with them? What do we do with them in Decatur? Because,
one of the standard practices in decommissioning buildings is you sell salvage rights when you sign the contract. So the school district may not be aware that if there are specific items they wish to remove, they need to specify that usually in the contract.
oh yes, right.
And I'm not sure that the contracting officers would be thinking in historical type of or artistic things.
Rescuing
Right.
art.
So I have written this article in the Decatur Tribune, which has 10 people that read it. Okay. And I've told 20 more tonight.
Yeah, no.
I've written the superintendent. I hope to write a statewide article. I'm not trying to cause panic. I'm just trying to cause awareness.
Yeah.
Timely.
Because if you take a picture, by the way, I had 6 of these plastic photos that go around, so I want 6 when I leave here. If you take a look at the picture of the Cornell over there, it's all beat up.
Sit down.
So you need an art restorationist at some point. How do we cut it out of the wall?
Right.
Who's going to restore it if we want it, and who's going to pay for it? Where do we put it?
And
The
there's
same thing with the other one.
The legal issues of how do you transfer ownership in a way that's recognizable too.
Right, and this is how Brigida did the correct thing in inventory transfer, she got, and she sent me the transfer sheets. So she sent me the 1970, I'm not sure if they're even dated, 1974-ish transfer sheets from Millikin University to the now Millikin Homestead, saying, but no value or any kind of thing like that. Just that. So you own that piece. If you read the January 6th article on the bottom, it says you got another little piece. Did you get it? I don't know. You had another question here?
Yeah, well, two quick things. One is we got to think about where we want to put the fountain.
I think it should come here.
We got to think about where to put the fountain. And then number two, in your research, did you find out if there are any ancestors still here from her family?
Stouts?
Yeah.
Do you use genealogical?
They're all in Fairlawn.
They're all in Fairlawn.
So the sequence is the father was a tinsmith. Now that sounds kind of goofy until you think, oh, how many ceilings were made out of tin?
Lots.
How many cornices were made out of zinc and tin? He had a roofing shop and all kinds of, and he's just changing jobs just constantly the whole time. So they live over here until 1900. Then they move down by the river when the kids are starting to get out, and then they end up moving over here on West William Street. Okay? So we got their addresses as they move around, and their family size shrinks. But the dad dies, I think, in 33, and he is a mason, not bricks and mortar. So he created the first cornerstone memory box for the original Masonic temple here in Decatur. Okay? So in the around 1880. And then when they built the new one, and Staley paid to have the new building done in the late 20s, he dug out the old box, opened it up, showed people, and then put the old box in a new copper box in the new cornerstone of this building here. So that's your connection with the dad. The dad dies and is buried here. The mom then moves up to Chicago with the daughter, and they decide to move to Southern California. So that's where they live and die, but they come back here and get buried. The two boys, one was in Nebraska, and he had a son that became a major league pitcher for the Cardinals. You know, Joe the Hook Stout. So the answer to your question is, I don't have and the Grinnell, there's some guy in California who has created a Facebook page that is promoting his great-grandfather type of thing. You know, so, yeah,
As a historian, do you use genealogical tools?
Like genealogical tools?
Yeah.
Yes, that's what I did for them. So I have a large newspaper database for the world. So I'll do a newspaper search. I have Ancestry, so I do Ancestry.com, which is how I got some more of this information about them. I'll use the city directories. In this particular case, I actually asked the county clerk and the county recorder for help to try and, make sure I had it right. And then I asked Brigida, who knows everything.
It's amazing. It's almost like a detective work.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
If you like History Channel, that's not this.
Yeah. Mr. Ames.
Yes, sir. Mark, really enjoyed it. Great job with the presentation. Please let us know when you're going to be on the Antique Roadshow to have that appraised.
But I just happen to have this thing here. Yeah, you can get it fixed later. So I will be speaking in 3 or 4 weeks at the Culver House. Can you say that here?
Yes.
During Preservation Week, and I'm going to be talking about the history of Ferris wheels in Illinois and the Columbian Exposition in 1893. So anybody wants to get more Z's in before that. All right? You good? You good?
Is Ida buried here in Decatur? Or
Ida, yes. I also use Find a Grave.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, well,
Gravestones.com.
those work.
Greatest shrinking thing. Yes, and so I just looked at it again today because I wanted to get the dad's, make sure I had the dad's correct information. The grave website has a lot of fair lawn, so all the Stouts in Decatur are online with a little bio and a link to who's who in the business. But not everybody in the world like that, but they happen to be because someone took a picture of the grave. All that business. So, all right. Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.